Hey there, friends. This is Bill McDonald. Welcome to the ELAR and Right Prescription. And we are in the middle of a countdown to the test for at least Texas teachers and anybody else around the United States that might be preparing for any writing, reading, editing, and or revising questions. Our question that we're going to focus on today is a revising, which I use the acronym ARMS, but a little bit different way than many of you. I use add, remove, replace, or move something. And I use the color green for add, red for remove, green for replace, because you're going to replace something with whatever thing that you removed. Um, uh, and then move is yellow, which means don't add or take anything away. Just uh, put it in a different spot, bring it together, change the order, just so that it makes sense without all of those Mrs. PVC things that we talked about. And to kind of help some of your kids, I want to show you um, on the writing folder how you can combine the two worlds of editing and revising when you're learning how to do questions to do with revising. They have to follow all of the editing rules for the most part in this multiple choice format. Now, I did say that I would wish that if this was text entry um, and it needed a comma, that because we're focusing on the content more than the conventions, that they would at least still give your students a point for having the correct content in terms of the order. But my worry is that they're going to hold your kids accountable for conventions. In multiple choice, they're already there, so they just have to pick them. So combining sentences is a revising skill. And so we're combining something in the introduction, the body, or the conclusion of a selection. And we're going to use the word move. So we're we're moving something. We're moving sentences. We're going to move two sentences together according to that. Now, what I want you to notice, the very last rule of cups when it's written correctly is sentence or sentences because of the run-ons and fragments that they'll be asking your kids to look for. And so when you get the skill down of sentence boundaries, uh, what you're going to notice is a lot of times the distractors, the answers that are wrong on editing and or revising have problems like one of these that are here, and the three that I circled are the reasons that the three wrong answers are not going to be able to be chosen. But when you're checking for the content slash conventions, look for run-ons, for fragments, to see if the comma and conjunction are written correctly, repetition to make sure that you don't change the content of the final answer, you don't change the meaning, that you have the correct cause and effect relationship. Because if they have the word because in the middle, they're basically telling you the cause, and that means that the first part is the effect. And so we have to make sure that we check that by putting the because part in first and see if it does make sense. And also the other one is a compare and a contrast error. Um, those tend to come out more often with middle school, but I will show you how to do that. So let's take a look at our question, okay? And if you're using the strategy of telling your kids they have to show you something on paper, then on paper they could write Cue number 5. They would write an R to make sure that they read the question and they read the sentences that it's about, that they understand the question, what it's asking them to do, and they understand uh, where it's asking them to do it in the passage. That they would do any labeling, marking of the test in both places that you asked them to do, because if your students only do online strategies and nothing in terms of lined and blank paper, that means there's not going to be any lab work. And whatever they put on lined and blank paper is sort of going to be like an X-ray to help you see what they were thinking. And so this is one way to kind of have them do a little checklist. We're going to eliminate 3, and we'll select one that we'll submit as our final response. So let's take a look at sentences 12 and 13. So if you're going to use paper, remind your kids that in the computer, the selection is going to be to the left and the answer choice is to the right. And so they would scroll up and down so that the the passage and the question that it's about, the sentences that are being asked about, and the question are side by side in the computer like this. Okay, so let's take a closer look. Sentence 12, and if you can look at me in the corner there, I have a couple of suggestions that my little document camera is not wanting to stay in position. Capital, and because my right hand is holding on to my mouse per se, or my pencil if I'm be writing strategies, my left hand is free to pay attention to capitalization and punctuation. Capital, they love video games, period. They being the children. You can look back and see who the pronoun is talking about. And so this sentence is a complete thought, but it is kind of short. And so I can, based on the last video that I showed you, this is probably going to be one of those short, uh, long that you put uh, together to kind of make a sentence flow a little bit more smoothly. They, a little bit of repetition there, but sometimes if there's only one word of repeating versus a phrase or several phrases, then you would pick the one with the least amount of repeating. They could possibly, capital, they could possibly play video games. They, the subject, could possibly play video games 24 hours a day if no one could take the time to tell them otherwise. Okay. If no one could take the time to tell them otherwise. Now, what I want you to notice um, in the sentence, because video games is there twice. Another thing that we talked about is all in all, it's just 2 bricks on 2 walls. Okay. Same bricks on 2 walls. And so if we're going to play the game called Come Together, type now, or come together right now, then we would probably want to practice text entry, capital, they love video games, comma, and could uh, they love video games and could possibly play them 24 hours a day if no one would take the time to tell them otherwise. I didn't put a comma because I just said what they love and what they play. They love video games and could possibly play them 24 hours uh, a day if no one would take the time to tell them otherwise. Or I could use a comma with a coordinating conjunction. Capital. They love video games, comma, So they could probably play them 24 hours a day if no one would take the time to tell them otherwise. And all I did was I made little walls to separate each detail, what I would probably call each dum-dum, so I can kind of break it down into manageable puzzle pieces. Okay, so let's look at our answer choices. Capital. They love video games because they could possibly play them 24 hours a day if no one would take the time to tell them otherwise. Okay, well, because of the because here, I'm going to flip this around. Because they could possibly play them 24 hours a day if no one could take the time to tell them otherwise, comma, they love video games, period. Because that's the wrong cause and effect relationship, think of this, that C comes before E, so the cause comes before the effect. So what it could have been was capital because they love video games, comma, they could possibly play them 24 hours a day if no one would take the time to tell them otherwise. And so that one, like we mentioned in the sentence boundary problems, it was the wrong cause and effect relationship. Okay. Letter B, capital, they love video games, comma, and they could possibly play video games because of repetition. We don't want to pick something that's going to repeat. So I've eliminated one. I feel like the wrong cause and effect relationship we wouldn't want. I don't really like this one. Of course, we're not going to click submit yet on it or do anything. Um, but remember this, your students would be having just A, B, C, D, and they can write on their lined paper, why did they get rid of A? Oh, it was the wrong cause and effect relationship. They could have the letter B and write the word repetition. If they, let's look at C now. Capital, they love video games, comma, so. So this is the cause and this is the effect. That does make sense. I can use comma with a fanboys. Okay. And I'll go ahead and put that there. That the so represents that because this first part is true, the second part is a result of that. So um, they could possibly play them, and I didn't repeat that time. So that sounds like the best one so far. Let's see what's wrong with D, if anything. Capital. They love video games. My brain made me pause. They could possibly play them 24 hours a day if no one would take the time to tell them otherwise. So on the 2018 fourth grade test, I'm going to call that the revising test from the opposite of heaven. It was the most difficult test. And so if you're an elementary teacher, I would really recommend that you go over this passage, this revising passage that starts on page 389 of the Dear Doc digital binder, where I kind of imitated the most difficult questions from that year. And it even says the question number and how well the students did in the whole state of Texas. And it was because of the revising test that was similar to this one that actually made my graphic organizer that hand that I have shown you a few times, because this test did very poorly. This was probably, if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to, it was only two answers got even in the 60s in the whole state of Texas. That's like 350,000 students. Uh, Less than two-thirds of the kids knew how to take a word and replace it with something that's more specific to the content of a sentence, and even less, 1% left, less knew how to combine sentences. And it was for some of these same reasons that they had a run on. So if you're using the line paper, then you would, on A, cross it off on the lined paper and write C and E with a reverse arrow. On B, you would write repetition. And if you ask your kids to prove it, then they can say video games on the line paper 2 times. Letter C is the one we're going to pick. So I'm going to put it select there. And I would submit that into the computer. Um, and I would write comma fanboys and the one that we would use. Then we know that because our when we read out loud and our brain makes us pause, that we turned a passage that had two complete thoughts just with repetition into one thought with a run-on that was too long. And so I did teach a video um, about Dorothy having a dog named Toto, and I changed his name to Tutu because whenever you have a fragment that's a sentence that's too long, it's called a run-on, or a sentence that's too short, it's normally called a fragment because it's missing either the subject or the predicate. Now, you have to be careful with the too short one because your kids can think just because a sentence is short that it's missing a subject and predicate. No, they is the subject pronoun. What about them? They love video games. That's what they do. So I'm gonna if I was to write on the line paper, I would cross off the D and write run on there. And so then we've decided that we're going to go ahead and select letter C. So there you have it, a rules acronym that is in your um, reading and writing um, binder. Uh, I will make sure I tell you what page that's on when I post this to my YouTube and to Facebook for you guys. And this is from page 389 to page 392. And I would say that uh, if you're new to writing and you maybe teach sixth, seventh, or eighth grade, I think that these questions are probably rigorous enough where you can even have your middle school students practice them. The binder is full of editing and revising passages. Um, but this is one that I would recommend since we're towards the end of the year that you start your elementary and middle school students with. And again, I started with combining sentences because that's what many of you teachers told me you needed. My next video will be a secondary level, a little bit more compound, complex, difficult skills to master. But I really think that if our kids can't even focus on these kind of mistakes, then we're going to struggle when it comes to the more difficult ones that your students are going to get in middle school and high school. So please share or tag one of your teacher friends. Email me if you have any questions or you have a specific strategy. If you purchased the countdown to the test and you would like some specific guidance, I'm going to do the secondary combining sentences. And then what I thought I would do next was I want to take the most difficult question from each of the practice tests, the ones that I sent you for third through fifth, the most difficult one in terms of how what was copying in sixth through eighth, and then again the most difficult in terms of percent correct in Texas. Just gonna practice one question from each of those because if they're that low, I don't think it's a good idea to just assign a test to kids. It might be best to take the 5 or 6 lowest questions and say, you know what, let's let's practice these as a grade level in our class because if this the end of the year the students in May did that poorly on those questions, then you know that uh, if you had 2 whole semesters to teach the skill and it got such a low score, then my reasoning for using questions that were like those most difficult ones is so that you can model or at least you can have your kids work in groups or with a partner, not have them work solo because they'll probably struggle just as much as the kids from the previous years. So thank you guys. Uh, See you in the next video.